We've got 10 chapters to get through, so get on that, get to stepping. Go. Dear God, thank you for this day, Father. Thank you for your great love for us. Thank you for the study this morning. I pray that we may be encouraged, and we may be strengthened, and have put our concerns and worries at ease in a world where there is so much abuse, Father. And when it seems like we're the focus of it, I pray that we can realize that you've got other plans for us, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. So this morning we will begin with Job chapter 1 in verse 13. We went through the first 12 verses last time. So rather than going through 12 verses this time, we're going to try to get through 12 chapters this time. 10 chapters anyway. So I will say, if you missed the class last week, get a copy of it. I'm fully convinced that the class last week is one that every Christian should hear probably a number of times through their life until they get the concept nailed down of what is going on as far as your salvation and whatnot goes. There are fundamental things in that you'll still be able to get to heaven, but your trip on the road to heaven may be a little sadder, right? If you don't really understand how straight the road is to heaven and how secure, it's like bowling with bumpers. You know what bumpers are? Anybody go bumper bowling? Mm-hmm. Right? Put the little bumpers up. It is like, the last class basically lets you know that there's bumpers. And prior to that, you didn't know there were bumpers, and so you feel like you're throwing gutter balls all the time, but then you realize, oh, thank you, Jesus. You put bumpers up. That's awesome. So, you can still throw it in the wrong lane if you choose to, but that's got to be your worth decision. In any event, here we go. Chapter 1. Let's get going. Chapter 1 will probably be the slowest chapter we've got. So, verse 13. Now there was a day when his daughters, sons and daughters, were eating and drinking wine in the oldest brother's house. Right there for a second I was like, that is cool. Because I know how me and my siblings get along, and sometimes we don't. And there'll be sometimes when ain't nobody doing nothing in anybody's house because we're all having rough days.
Or we live too far apart.
Well, and I take it that their family is spread out over an area, and certainly could use that as an excuse. They could say, well, I gotta, like Kel does, I gotta wash my hair Friday night, so I can't do anything. Right? So, but they hang out together, and so it's cool because what you see is that the brothers and sisters get along well. They should. That doesn't always happen. In fact, probably that usually doesn't happen where the siblings all get along well. And
we do in my family.
You do in your family? I'll just say it is in part a testament to a good upbringing.
Well.
Right? Then you get verse 14 and 15. There came a messenger to Job, and he said, the oxen were plowing with the donkeys and the feeding beside them, and the Sabines fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So the donkeys and the ox and the servants are all killed via who?
Sabines.
The Sabines. And you're like, oh, rough day. This is also before insurance, by the way. So, while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone escaped to tell you. And so the sheep and the servants are destroyed by what?
Fire of God.
Fire of God. That's the accusation the servant makes. Now, Job has the option to either take that. That's what was said. Job has the option to say God is against me or not, but he isn't taking it that way, right? So, but he certainly is faced with that. Okay, then fine. Maybe God is against me. He could have done that right there, right? So, verse 17, while he's yet speaking, another servant came. The Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone escaped to tell you. Right? So the servants, camels and the servants are killed via what? Chaldeans, right? Verse 18, while he was yet speaking, there came another who said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead, and I alone escaped to tell you. And there's no way you could understand this except this is the worst of worst days. People have lost all kinds of things in their life, and people have lost assets, and people have lost children. And it is a rare thing that you lose all of that all at once. I mean, that's like, you might see that in the tsunami or something that happened. Was that in Japan? The tsunami ran through there, right? You might see something like that there, where everybody and everything is wiped out, and the only person that gets to let you know anything about it is the person that escaped to tell you. This is already just about the saddest of sad days. Then Job arose and tore his robe, and he shaved his head, and he fell on the ground and said, God, why have you done this to me? That is one of the most beautiful, unexpected turning points in Scripture, I think, in literature through the history of the world, is the fact that he could lose so much, so quickly and immediately. He arises, he tears, and there's the text even proves that he's not insane, he's not disconnected from this stuff. He is emotionally erect. But Job, it says, he arose, he tore his robe, he shaved his head, and he fell on the ground. Those are all things you expect to see in mourning. And then it follows up with, and worshipped. And that's a powerful statement if in the worst of scenarios, you can still worship God. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb. And what?
Naked I shall return.
Naked I shall return. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
We all should look at our lives like that. Because there are problems and there are troubles that are coming away.
Absolutely. Well, and it's interesting too, the fact that he falls down and worships, and then it's followed by this, and I look at the nature of the attitude that he's got as he's worshiping God, clothes torn, head shaved, on the ground, with nothing and everything that he loved is gone. And not just that, part of the value of your assets is not the amount of money in the bank. There comes a certain amount of money in the bank where it doesn't matter, in truth. In fact, I saw Warren Buffett donated something to the equivalent of, he's been going through this thing where he's trying to donate most of his stocks to nonprofit organizations and whatnot, and donated some, if I remember correctly, something like $46 billion worth of stocks. And I will tell you a secret. Warren Buffett, well, he's glad to do that, and I think he's doing a noble and virtuous thing. I'm not trying to in any way talk trash on him for that. He's doing it. But I don't think that he had to take a reduction in quality of lifestyle to do that.
Right.
Which is crazy.
It's not like the widow.
Right. $46 billion, and he might see the number change, but I don't think he felt, the pains of a lifestyle change for the offering. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not knocking the offering. Don't hear me wrong and think I'm trying to trash talk his offering. That's noble and virtuous.
He gave
Right.
an offering, but not a sacrifice.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's fair.
Sacrifice usually costs you something. You
In
feel it.
return, he gets a huge tax break
Yeah.
also.
So to be fair though, he's given up, I think it was something like 51 or 52% of his stocks at this point. Right? How many in this room would give up 50-something% of your stocks? So it's not like he's giving chump change and stuff that has no potential to change his life or anything, but I don't think he's like, oh, I guess I'll have to, eat off the dollar menu this week. I don't think he's doing that. I'm just suspicious. So, right, yeah, I want to give him good credit for that, but, if you lost everything you had and your life was a different life going forward, and so with all these losses that Job faces, part of that is his future. It's not just the present that is under attack. If he just lost all of his assets, is there some expectation that his future going forward will be different? And so not only did he lose in the immediate, there is potential for him to believe, my future is ruined now too. How can I ever recover from this? And that's aside from all these children that he's lost. And who can ease the heart of a grieving parent? Yes.
How about this, the Lord has given and the Lord has taken away?
Right.
What about the Lord will provide?
Was it the Lord that took it away?
So it doesn't look like he did anything. In fact, the next verse is going to say, in all this Job did not sin or charge God with wrong.
Right.
So I would argue that the bottom line, one of the things you have to realize about your theology, your own personal theology, is whatever happens, and even when the devil does stuff, the buck stops with God. Good things happen, bad things happen. No matter what, the devil cannot do what God does not allow the devil to do.
That's right.
And I mean, you see that play out in this, because who does the devil have to go to for permission?
Yeah, to go to
God. So no matter what, we find that the buck stops with God. However, that doesn't give us a right to look at God and we see all the terrible things are going on in our life, and even unjust terrible things, and say, God, you've got no right to do this. It goes back to, I'm reminded, I think it's in Romans where it talks about, does the created thing have the right to say to the Creator, why did you make me like this? Right? There are children born with all kinds of inherent diseases and complications. Even with that, there's no right to say to God, you had no right to do this. And God is doing stuff. I've told you guys before about a gal named Jewel Davidson from up in Oregon. And the only teeth in her mouth she had was her 2 front teeth. And she was very, in fact, when I went to visit her at the hospital, I was told before I went to visit her at the hospital, don't mention her teeth. She's very concerned about her teeth. And you'll notice she just has 2 front teeth and she's going to feel terrible about it. And I went in there and she gave me the biggest, most beautiful smile. And as I was talking to her, she said, I have to tell you the coolest thing. I said, go for it. And she told me this story about this girl who walked in previously and talked to her. And wasn't even a part of her, didn't know who she was. She was there to visit somebody else and stuck her head in the door and saw her and came over and said, you know what? Your teeth look just like a bunny's. Told her, your teeth look just like a bunny. And so she said she stuck her teeth out. She said, like this to the girl. And she thought it was so hilarious and cute. And they played back and forth with her 2 front teeth, right? Played the game back and forth and giggled and giggled and giggled. And she said that made her day. So, amen. And that was a typical virtue of this gal, Jewel Davidson. She was living up to her name of being a jewel. She ended up passing away. But everything about it, people would come in and pray with her and say, I'm so sorry that, she had bed sores and all kinds of different things. I'm so sorry you're going through all this trouble. And she would say, don't worry about that. How are you doing? I mean, it was just that spirit about her all the time. And what a beautiful thing it is to, even in your sorrow and even in your loss and even in the stuff you're ashamed of, be able to say, God's given, God's taken away, but blessed be the name of the Lord, and have that kind of a heart that just looks for God's hand working for you instead of against you. There were a number of things.
I was going to say, at this point, though, he's God given, God take it away, but at this point, he's lost everything. His body's going to be racked and in pain. And you can figure he's just going to, I'm just going to sit here and die. I'm next. This has got to happen next. He says, oh, God will take me.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay, I'm just talking about, and then his friends are showing up while he's waiting for the end to come and seeing how they're going to, what are they going to do?
Rough times.
But I know you're probably gonna cover this, but for myself, and I know all of us, our hope is not here.
Amen.
We love our kids with our heart, we love the things that God has given us, but if our hope is here, we're defeated already.
Amen. Absolutely. Flawlessly said. Go ahead.
Oh, I was communicating with your daughter who was in the back of the room.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Telepathic going on. That's all right. So, yeah, I want you to notice, it says, in all this, he did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. And so then the question I have for you, is it sin to charge God with wrongdoing? Is it sin to charge God with wrongdoing?
Charge or
The
regret about it.
question you got here is that God is charging God with
wrong.
is charging God with wrong, sin.
With sin wrong.
Yeah.
If I'm accusing God, yes, it's
Amen. I think that's the right answer, right? Is charging God with wrong, however you want to word it. Either way is fine. There probably ought to be a comma right after the word wrong. Is charging God with wrong sin. Right? So you notice it says, in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Right? So is it sinful to say, God, you did wrong. You did me dirty. Is it sinful to say that to God?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Right? So, and remember that, because as we continue on, I'm going to propose to you something I've never heard anybody talk about. I don't try to come up with new and interesting things. I'll tell you, I promise you. I don't try to invent stuff or come up. I don't look for a way to say, how can we make this interesting? I just read the text and then I call it as I see it, okay? But as we go, I'm going to propose to you a couple of times where Job is beginning to make an accusation against God. And you're going to see a pattern where Job will start to accuse God of doing wrong. And then it's almost like mid-sentence, he's like, oh, stupid. And he pulls back from it. And so I think he holds off on getting himself in trouble till very late. And you'll find too that Job will actually get, towards the end of the book of Job, Job will get reprimanded by God severely. And it's interesting when I hear people talk about the book of Job, because they'll say, Job never did anything wrong. And I get that that's how the story begins, but it's almost like people didn't read it to the end. Because in the end, Job is saying this stuff, and God comes and tells Job, where were you when the foundations were laid? Who do you think you are? Right? He says this stuff to Job. And so what you're going to see is an increasing aggravation in Job that is provoked by his friends. They're good friends, but yeah, sometimes you got good friends who are causing you some trouble, right? Go ahead.
Well, I guess this is a point that I find perplexing is why does God allow calamity to happen? I mean, you know, and then we call it off and saying, well, God allowed the devil to cause calamity, or God's allowing him to have free reign. So why is he doing that?
So let's answer that. We actually answered that last week, which is why I haven't touched on it very much. Were you here last week?
Yeah.
Okay. So in last week, if you're here last week, one of the things that you remember is this concept of God is leaving angels without excuse. The accusation is made against Job. He only does what you want because you don't do anything, you don't let anything bad happen to him. You've got a hedge built around him. You're not letting anything bad happen to him. And the accusation, remember, we looked at all the other passages about what's going on behind the scenes with the angels. And what we discover is people are going to judge the angels, and Satan has set out from the foundation of the world to prove that we're not qualified to judge the angels. That's why he met Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and he goes and tries to get them to sin against God. He's trying to get them to sin against God so that he can prove to God we're not qualified to judge the angels. You see what I'm saying? That's why he's the accuser. So he comes before God in the book of Job, and he's accusing God and Job of shenaniganizing between the two of them. Right? And so, God is saying, all right, take the gloves off, do what you want to him, and he'll still be faithful. And he does this, I think God is doing this so that at the end of the day, there is no excuse left for angels to say, but humans are on different terms. And the Bible does the same thing, by the way, with Jesus, where the Bible will say about Jesus, he was tempted in every way except without sin. The idea is, guess who else is without excuse?
We are.
We are. I mean, the statement in that is, he was treated just like us, but he did not do it. So what does that mean about us? We're without excuse as well. God's design is that every knee should willfully bow. That every tongue should willfully profess allegiance to God. And at Judgment Day, every single creature, including angels and demons and all that, is going to look to God and say, you were right in sending me to heaven or hell or whatever the outcome is. Even the condemned will say you were right in doing what you're doing. Right? Because everybody will be without excuse. Men, angels, demons, everybody is going to be without excuse. And so this is God removing excuses from the angels. This story here, so where God says, have you considered my servant Job? I know you're the accuser. Consider my servant Job. He's flawless. The devil's, no, he's just doing that because you're just buying him off. Okay. Take any reward away. The only thing he can't do, he ends up saying the only thing he can't do is kill him. Take any reward away from him, and let's see what he does. And he isn't doing that to play games with us, or because he doesn't care about Job. He's using Job as an example of righteousness is not bought. Now, will God reward his righteousness?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Right?
But I think also, with me, it helps me understand that I'm worth God's trouble.
Amen.
And Satan wants us to think we're not worth the trouble.
Right.
Because and here's God, and he's done all this for us, and we blow it constantly.
Right.
But then we see God forgives, and he helps us, and he makes it possible. So we're worth the trouble that God is doing.
Amen. Amen. So you get chapter 2. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them to present himself before the Lord. And I want you to notice, the way I'm reading this is like you've heard this before. Why?
We have.
We have. Right? And so I just want to point out that this is a regular practice of the devil. This is a regular practice of the devil to try to present himself before God so that he can be the accuser. Okay? Satan answered the Lord and said, I've been going back and forth over the earth and walking up and down on it. And the Lord said to Satan, hey, you consider my servant Job? There is nobody like him, blameless and upright. He fears God and turns away from evil. He still holds fast to his integrity, although you enticed me against him to destroy him without reason. Guess what? God agrees. When trouble comes and you're like, there's no reason for this, guess what? God agrees. There is no reason for this. Just so you know, don't feel like God is just not knowing what's going on. God is like, yeah, I agree. This isn't quite right. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. All that a man has, he will give for his life, but stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life. And again, this goes back to God saying, all right, that's your excuse? Fine, we're going to take any opportunity for excuse away. And you can bring him to the most degrading state you want. And here's the beauty of it is, when God said that, God already had a plan for his rebuilding. You see what I mean? It's not like God is willy-nilly letting this go on. Ephesians chapter 3 verse 10 says that the purpose of the church is to declare the manifold wisdom of God to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms. Godly folks are sending a message to the spiritual world saying, we can do this with limited knowledge. So, you who've been in the presence of God, guess what? You have no excuse. That's really the theme of what's going on here. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord, and he struck Job with loathsome sores, and from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, and he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. And you couldn't get a sadder picture going on. So I want to ask you some questions about this so far. Make sure we're getting our blank. God will leave the fallen angels without excuse.
What's the first one?
This is
Common?
a regular practice of the devil. Regular practice of the devil. God will leave the angels without excuse. And I want you to notice too, even with this, go ahead and strike his skin and his bones. And by the way, there's diseases that strike your skin. And there's elements that strike your bones. But for diseases to strike your skin and your bones, it has got to be a bad disease. Right? So, but notice God says you cannot do what? Can't kill him. Guess what God has done there? God keeps a hedge. That's your blank. God keeps a hedge. Even in this, God is keeping a hedge. If you... I'll just make some statements, and I'll say them as, affirmative statements, because I think that it's true. There are some people with some diseases that the disease may be heavier than your friendship. The disease may be heavier than your friendship. There was a person in Cambodia. My dad does mission work in Cambodia, so I get these stories back now and again about different events that go on in Cambodia. And there was a gal, I don't know what the disease was particularly. The disease was described as similar to leprosy, but my understanding of leprosy is it doesn't exist anymore. But that she had some kind of extremely highly contagious skin disease that was the type of thing that would kill you guaranteed if you got it. And she was in her 80s or 90s, and she was getting old, and they just accepted she's going to die soon. That's life. That's disappointing, but it's what it is. She heard the gospel, and she wanted to be baptized, and she couldn't get anybody to baptize her because to get her to water, somebody had to carry her to water. And nobody wanted to touch her, to pick her up, to carry her to water so she could be baptized. And one of the missionaries went out there, and he actually picked her up and carried her out to, I'm guessing it was a river, and baptized her in the river. And everybody sat back and was like, And the missionary did not know her, apart from she wanted to be baptized. The missionary didn't grow up with her, wasn't her family, wasn't a child, any of that kind of stuff. And the group, the tribe she grew up in, who loved her dearly, guess what the disease did for the relationships there? Separated it. Produced division for them. So it's interesting because there are certain diseases that the diseases of such a nature that people will say, you know that I love you, but we have got to stay away from each other just for the sake of quarantine, right? I mean, you hear the logic, right? We just can't, I can't touch you, and I'm sure you understand. And it's interesting because you could go to Acts chapter 16, I believe it is, where there's this woman, and she's carrying a procession is going through and carrying a coffin, and with it, I think it was her dead son was inside of the coffin, and Jesus was of what race? He was a Jew. Did you know Jesus was a Jew? So this Jewish Jesus comes over, and there's this procession going on, and did you know any priest, any minister, guess what they would have not been doing?
Touching.
Don't touch nothing, right? Because then you're unclean, you're funky. So they find filthy people, they go ahead and carry the casket. Family, if they love them enough, they go ahead and carry the casket, but nobody in ministry, and certainly no teacher of anything, was going to touch it. And it's interesting because what the Bible says, I think it says about 4 things. It says that Jesus saw her. It says that Jesus felt compassion and pity on her. It says that Jesus touched her and touched the coffin. And then it says that he spoke and said to the boy, get up. And I'm going to tell you, there's 4 things there as far as ministry goes that people overlook. Most of the time, people don't even see when there's hurting and broken people. It's not nice. I'm going to tell you, your eyes don't like looking at sad stuff. The United States has become a nation where comedy is the most valuable resource we've got. Because we live in a sad and pitiful world, and nobody wants to talk about serious stuff, so people make a joke out of everything. You know? But he saw her. What was it? This isn't the Bible that I've got the outline in.
Luke 7:11.
Is it 7-Eleven? Thank you.
Yeah, I like the grocery store.
What's that?
Like the grocery store.
Like the grocery store?
7-Eleven.
Oh. So,
Just joking.
well, that doesn't look like it to me. Act 7-Eleven?
Luke.
No, I wasn't talking about that.
Yeah, you were.
Okay, was I? Thought I was talking about
Jesus
that.
isn't in Acts.
Well, oh yes, that makes much better sense. Well, he is, but not right there. You're right. Good job. Good job. Soon afterward, he went to a town in Nain and called his disciples, and a great crowd went with them. As he drew near to the gate, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and a considerable crowd followed from the town with her. And when the Lord saw her, yep, this is the one. When the Lord saw her, there's number 1, he had compassion on her, and then he said to her, do not weep. Then he came up and touched, right? So there's your 4 things there. He sees her, he has compassion on her, he speaks, and he touches, right? If you want to know how to help hurting people, there's a great methodology. Sorry, I don't know, sometimes my brain is just cheese whiz. So.
No, you're not perfect.
Amen. Yes, it's true, I'm not perfect. I know by looking at me, you'd be like, oh, clearly. All right. So what does disease do to relationships? Divides and hurts, right? It can be a source of division for relationships. And so it's interesting because Job's wife comes in and Job says, what is up with you? Will you just quit with the integrity thing already? Curse God and die. Right? What was the devil's accusation what did the devil predict that Job would do?
Curse God.
Curse God and die.
Isn't it crazy that his wife is doing the work of the devil? His wife is being the ambassador, not of God, but of the devil in this scenario. That is insane to me.
Would that be grounds for a divorce?
I don't think it would. I don't think that's how that works. But do we? So did Peter find himself at some point being the ambassador of the devil?
Yes. Yep.
Right? Jesus even says, get behind me,
Satan.
Satan.
You know what? I hadn't put a lot of thought into it until just now. While this is going on, and his wife turns on him, and that had to have meant also a really heavy burden
Amen.
for your wife to turn on you in a time like that. And it would also show me the disloyalty she had towards her whole family all along.
So
She had that type of
fully convinced from my limited experience with life that men and women deal with scenarios differently. And I can see a dad, my own experience for myself, I can see me as the logical guy saying, okay, lousy things have happened, I'm going to do the best that I can with it. And I can also see a female saying, this is an offense against me. This is an attack on me. I love my kids. I love my family. And they're dead. Will you quit already, curse God, and die? Right? Give me some resolve. So I don't want to just take Job's wife and just run her through the mud. Because I can see the difference in logic between the two. And honestly, it makes sense to me what's going on, because I'm fully sure that men don't hurt any less than women, but they deal with that hurt differently. I'm convinced that they deal with that hurt differently. And go ahead. I was just going to say, and she's probably dealing with a lot of wild emotions that would be very difficult to tame. And so I would suspect that that's what provoked that comment from her. But go ahead.
So this plays out today with people that are sick or old age or aren't expected to live, so they, in some states, they legalize assisted suicide. They're doing the same thing.
I don't know of a state where it isn't legalized, they're just not calling it assisted suicide.
Right. Well, they don't want to, they think they're doing the right thing because they don't want to see this person suffering, so it's we'll go ahead and die.
Just start prescribing morphine to the level that people are going to die from not being hungry.
They call it comfort care.
And they call it comfort care. And I don't know of a state where that is not legal.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
The difference is she said curse God.
Right.
That's
Absolutely.
a difference.
She is angry. I will say that.
Over the line.
She's over the line. Yeah. And sometimes we cross the line. We say stuff, we might throw a comment out and then think, that was stupid. We don't get any follow-up with her thought. What we know is the burden was on Job to succeed or lose. And so he remains the focus of what's going on. And then she's over there, instead of being the helper that God designed her to be, she is more burdened. You see what I'm saying?
But you gotta remember, she lost her children. And that's a big burden.
That's why I say I don't want to throw her in the mud. You know, she is going through a difficult time.
But we want to learn from her.
Absolutely.
We're gonna do that.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't negate the fact of what she did.
Yeah.
Even though we think, okay, she's in pain because she lost her children. All right.
Correct.
When you lose a child, it's understandable you're going to be in pain, but that doesn't cut you that slack. Say, okay, curse God for what's happened to me.
Well, and this goes back to chapter 1, verse 22, where it says, in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. And that goes just back to reiterate. Is it sin to charge God with wrong? Yes. Right? You cannot go around saying, if you're going to, and we're going to see the same here in chapter 3, but if you're going to curse, I will tell you, don't curse God. Right? If you're going to curse the dog or the cat or the goldfish, leave God out of it. Right? His wife is working for the devil. Notice what he says to her. Verse 10. You speak as one of the foolish women. Right? Shall we receive good from God and not, what do you guys have in your text?
Receive adversity.
Adversity, trouble. I'll tell you, in the ESV it gets translated as evil. The word is trouble. The word is trouble. And by the way, anybody who's doing the translating here ought to be cautious, because part of what they're doing with that is accusing God of something. And that's part of why the word here is trouble, not evil. Right? There are difficulties in life. That doesn't mean God is being evil. And this certainly isn't a scenario where Job is saying, should we accept good from God and not evil? He's not saying that. He said, should we accept good from God and not trouble?
Yeah.
Trouble isn't necessarily evil, you know? So then it says, in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Now when Job's 3 friends heard all this trouble, by the way, it's the same word used for both of those, that had come upon him, they came each from his own place, Eliphaz from the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. They made an appointment together to come and show him sympathy and comfort him. So I just want to say, these are good friends. Again, before we take people and start throwing them down in the mud and kicking them, these people came from distant lands to check on, and I'm suspicious there were probably business relations that cared about it. Sometimes you get a business relation and they actually care more about you than your stuff. And I think these are those types of folks. Yes?
Can I insert a comedy?
Go for it.
Here we find the shortest man in the Bible.
The shoe height.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Okay.
So, verse 12, and when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him, and they raised their voices and wept. And they tore their robes, and they sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven, and they sat with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. And I will tell you, these aren't just good friends, these are very good friends. And I don't know of a time in real life, I can't think of an account where I know of a person who has gone and just sat with somebody for 7 days and 7 nights and said nothing. I've gone to visit people, and there's been times when there's no words to say. But those times have never lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. So you want to talk about a sincere, heartfelt brokenness that they have together? Now that being said, what's going to happen is their sincere, heartfelt brokenness after 7 days and 7 nights is going to get tired. And every one of us, I mean, like I said, we live in a comedy-based world. We're going to have news for us when we get to, I think it's Ecclesiastes. Or it says, basically, quit just giggling about everything and get serious, right? But the deal is this: if we can't handle sorrow for more than about 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, an hour starts getting really tiring for us as far as sorrow goes. And we start looking for something else to do. I'm fully convinced. In fact, we have medications now, just if somebody wakes up in the morning, they're feeling blue, not getting enough sun, not enough vitamin D. And I'm not, if you're on vitamin D or whatever, I'm not against that. But I'm saying, it is a symptom of our society not being able to process emotions well. And it is the case that sorrow, and heartbreak, and depression are things invented by who?
The devil.
I don't know. I would have said God. But I also can't say not the devil. Well, I wouldn't say they were invented by the devil, but he certainly exploits them. Right?
Definitely.
But God created the gamut of emotions that are within us.
Even anger.
Because he has them.
Because he's got them, right? And I think, too, those things exist to provoke us to change. If you were never sad, would you ever be repentant? How could you repent if you just medicated your way through it? You see what I'm saying? So,
The wife, question 5,
okay.
is that help?
Oh, expect and demand righteousness
Right.
from your spouse. Expect and demand righteousness from your spouse. She comes and she says, curse God and die, and what's he say? Well, that's your opinion. Is he seeking peace in the home?
No, calls her a silly woman.
Right. Is his wife being maybe what might call naggy? Someone might say naggy, maybe. Right? And then, why don't you curse God and die? Why don't you just quit already with your integrity? So sick of your integrity. When we go through the store, when our kids were younger, our kids would we put a loaf of bread in the basket. Huh? Put a loaf of bread in the basket, and you know where the best place to sit was?
On the bread.
On the loaf of bread. And then we had these tortilla breads, and we start pushing them out. And I remember maybe the first or second conversation we had about it, because I'd be like, well, now we have a responsibility to buy the bread. And my wife was like, but if you put the bread back, you get a new loaf. By the way, she doesn't do that now. Now she's like, we gotta buy the bread. But at the time, she was like, put the bread back, we can get a new loaf. What's the deal? We're still in the store, haven't paid for it yet.
Somebody else will like that flatbread.
Right, flatbread. People pay extra for flatbread now, right? So, but no, that's been our policy. If we're going through a store and our kids break a thing, right? They knock a jar off the shelf. Guess who's buying that jar? We are, And early on, my wife was like, okay, the integrity is kind of annoying, because here we have flatbread that we didn't want. Right, here we have a broken jar of jelly that we didn't want, can't eat. You know, what do you do with that? Keep the integrity, it's worth more than the $1.79 for the jar of jelly, who cares, right? And my wife is on board now with that. But if you would never say, hey, you're speaking crazy talk, if you never would rebuke your spouse and say, I expect you to be righteous, guess what will happen? You'll never get righteousness. My wife has more power than probably anybody on this earth to actually get me to be the man God calls me to be. And probably likewise myself with her. Right? So use that. It's good for you. And one of the saddest things is when godly men won't interact with their wives properly. We were talking about that this morning, about people who've let their wives just say, we're not going to have righteousness in our house. They won't say it in those terms, but they'll live that. And the husbands won't say, knock that off, because they don't like the argument with the wife. Right? So, these are good friends. These are very good friends. Chapter 3. If you're going to curse, what? Don't curse God. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. Amen, Job. I'm telling you, I'm not trying to promote cursing, but he cursed right. Right?
And he was very weary at that point.
Ain't that the truth?
He was like,
Ain't that? I have been with godly people, and I've heard them say some things, and I'm like, I wouldn't say that from a pulpit. And that's crazy if I wouldn't say it from a pulpit. You know it's right, because I say a lot of stuff. But right, there ought to be. I get myself in trouble. Right, Bill? Can I get myself in trouble?
Let's just not go into that right
Exactly. So,
we all.
but Job opens his mouth and he cursed the day of his birth, and Job says, let the day perish of which I was born in the night that said, a man is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor light shine on it. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Let clouds dwell upon it. Let the blackness of day terrify it. That night let thick darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of months. Behold, let that night be barren. Let no joyful cry enter it. Let those who curse it, who curse the day, who are already to rouse up the Leviathan. Let the stars of its dawn be dark. Let it hope for light, but have none, nor see the eyelids of the morning, because it did not shut the door of my mother's womb, nor hide trouble from my eyes. I am going to just step out on a limb here and say he was basically saying, why was I ever born? Right? Why was I ever born? Verse 11, why did I not die at birth, come out of the womb and expire? Why did the knees receive me, or the breasts that I should nurse? For then I would have lain down and be quiet, I would have slept. Then I would have been at rest with the kings and the counselors of the earth who rebuilt ruins for themselves, or with princes who had gold and filled their houses with silver. Or why was I not hidden as a stillborn child, as infants who never see the light? There the wicked cease from trouble, and they are weary and at rest. There the prisoners are at ease together, and they hear not the voice of the taskmaster. The small and great are there, and the slave is free from his master. Why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter in soul, who long for death, but it doesn't come, and dig for it, more than for hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave? Why is the light given to man, whose way is hidden, whom God has what? Hedged in. Now here's something interesting. What was the devil's accusation?
They got to build a hedge around.
What is Job's accusation?
Same.
God built a hedge around him. Now the difference is, the devil's accusation was that God built a hedge around Job for good, and Job's perception is, God built a hedge around me for trouble. It's the only way you can look at this. I'm going to tell you, Job is starting to walk that fine line. I will just propose to you that this is an accusing statement. God, you've got a hedge around me, but it isn't one for good. It's one for evil. Right? Is the nature of the statement that he's making. So he says, For my seeing comes instead of my sighing comes instead of my bread, and my groanings are poured out like water. For the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, and trouble comes. So he says through this passage, I wish I were, and I'm going to say dead. Yeah, the first one he doesn't actually say, he doesn't talk about death. He's just like, oh, the day I was born should have never happened. And this one here, he says, I wish I would have died on that day. Right. Right? So, Job realizes that God builds a hedge around Job, but he sees it as a negative. Right? Sees it as a negative. Chapter 4. Eliphaz begins to speak. Beginning in verse 2. If one ventures a word with you, are you going to be impatient? Yet who can keep from speaking? Behold, you've instructed many, and you've strengthened weak hands, and your words have upheld those who are stumbling, and you've made firm the feeble knees. But now it has come to you, and you're impatient. It touches you, and you're dismayed. This is a naive and ignorant statement that Eliphaz makes. And it's interesting because people will imagine in their mind that those who do the encouraging don't need any encouragement.
Say that again.
Those who encourage, people in their mind will imagine, oh, that's the preacher. He didn't need encouragement.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That's the person who goes and visits. Bill goes and visits all kind of folk, whatnot, helps them. Bill doesn't need any encouragement.
We all do.
That's crazy talk. Everybody needs encouragement. It is an ignorant thing that Eliphaz starts off with, even though it starts kind of a complimentary thing. It's dumb. You can compliment somebody with a dumb compliment. Right? Oh, you're too tough. You got, people do this all the time when you go to move a table or something. And they say, oh, you look strong. You don't need my help. You got this. Right? You ever hear that statement, Bill? You got this. You're tough enough. You can do this. Right? That's what he's doing. Oh, stiff upper lip, buddy.
That's what
What?
I say to
Yeah,
myself.
well, what would a true friend do?
A true friend might help.
Yeah, you might say, suck it up. Well, I mean, in the vernacular that we would use today.
Yeah. It's hard to suck it up if you just lost your entire stock market thing.
Yeah. I don't
And
know
if you
how
just
I-
lost your house, and if your wife is being cruel to you, and if all your kids are dead, it's hard, I mean, that's a bold move. To tell somebody, you know what? We've been sitting here for 7 days being sad about this. I'm done. I got places to be. I only took a week off of work. Right? I gotta go. Right? And I think that impatience is what's going on here. And it's interesting because guess who Eliphaz accuses of being impatient? Job. He says, but now it's come to you, verse 5, and you are discouraged. Impatience is the word. It's interesting that the guy who's ready to leave is accusing Job of being impatient. He wants to wrap it up. Sometimes I look out in the audience and I see you guys. Can you wrap it up? Right? That's okay. So check this out. Notice the accusation of Eliphaz has in verse 6. Is not your fear of God your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope? I want you to notice something. This is almost the same thing God says to the devil. Let's look at Job 1 verse 8. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, blameless and upright, a man who what? Fears God, shuns evil. Go back to this verse here in 4:6. Is not your fear of God your confidence, and your integrity of your ways hope? I'm telling you, the fear of God, plainly stated, the integrity of your ways shuns evil. He fears God and he shuns evil. That's Eliphaz's accusation of Job. So think about this. Eliphaz agrees with God that Job fears God and shuns evil. And now here's the crazy thing. Eliphaz, even though he agrees that he fears God, shuns evil, he's still going to accuse him. And that's the problem with Eliphaz. To know somebody is righteous and be too lazy to console them, rather to say, you know, you probably brought this on yourself. I know you're a righteous guy. I know you fear God. I know you don't do anything wrong, but probably you did something wrong. That's the gist of what Eliphaz is going to do. So, here is his logic. If you want to see Eliphaz's logic, it can be summed up in verses 7, 8. He says, remember, Job, Joby buddy Job, remember who that was innocent ever perished? Or where were the upright cut off? As I have seen those who plow iniquity sow trouble and reap the same. So what's he suggesting? What is Job reaping right now? Trouble. And he says to Job, you know, he puts it in really gentle terms. You know, Job, consider this. I've been thinking about it. And the only people I see that have trouble, living on the streets, got no food in their belly, all their life is a problem, they're people with poor choices. We would never say that, right? I'm telling you, I quoted me. I'm not quoting you guys. I'm telling you, I've said, oh, that guy's in that situation? I'm sure he's earned the consequences of it, right? I'm sure they put themselves in that. If they just make better choices, they wouldn't live behind Walmart. Is there any truth in that at all?
Yes.
There's some truth. But you should know that that is not all truth. Some people, bad things have happened, lousy scenarios have played out, and they've been doing the best they can, and they've got a lousy hand.
They got it just as they woke up that morning.
Right? Some people's houses burned down, and they didn't start the fire. Right? So, look at verse 17. So Eliphaz presents his logic, and then he presents a question to Job, because he's recognized that Job believes he's righteous. He's already got it figured out that Job thinks he's righteous. And so in verse 17 he says, can moral man be right before God? Can man be pure before his Maker? So now, check this out. Who's the accusation against? Great keenness. The accusation is against God. He's saying, doesn't matter what you do, even if you were righteous, God would just declare you are not righteous. And he could do that because he's God. That's his theology. And I just want to point out that's